Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're just waiting for our panelists here. We're running a few minutes late throughout the day, but we actually got some time back. Here's Lisa. Hi, Lisa. Um, yeah, so we're gonna just sort of kick things off here as folks are joining. We'll give folks a few minutes to join because we've been running about 5 minutes late throughout the day. Got Laura here. Hi, Laura and Emily.
Hi.
Hello. Oh, and we've got Irv as well. I think we're just waiting for Cris now. Oh, we got a bunch of folks showing up. That's awesome. That's awesome. So we'll just give Cris a few minutes here. Um, I'll give Cris a quick ping. Um, and then we'll sort of kick things off. Give me just one sec. Okay. All right. Yeah, we'll give Cris a quick ping, but we'll just go ahead and get started because it is 6:30 in the evening, and so want to respect folks' time and as the sun goes down and people want to eat dinner and all that. But yeah, very excited about this conversation. And very excited to be joined by some really cool people. So this is obviously, if you haven't joined us earlier today, this is Creative Industries Week, sort of celebrating the launch of the Creative Industries Division, a new division under the Economic Development Department that is designed to support folks making a living in the creative economy. And my name is Mike Young. I am a writer and researcher for a organization called Creative Startups. I don't work for the Creative Industries Division. I am just a contractor tasked with helping the Creative Industries Division come up with a plan as it launches. And very excited to talk specifically tonight about this idea of moving beyond the product, right, for artists and models for education and therapy business opportunities focused on creative practice. Because yeah, art is more than a product. Art is a discipline, art is a practice. And we've got some wonderful folks here to tell us some stories about that. We actually have we had a sort of late fill-in because Dr. Deborah Good was not able to join us um, with some flight issues, but we're very excited to be joined by Laura Lansrud Lopez, a former president of the New Mexico Art Therapy Association, former member of the nominations committee for the American Art Therapy Association, and currently vice chair to the New Mexico Counseling and Therapy Practice Board as the art therapy professional member. So how close did I get on the name there, Laura? Did I get it almost?
Yeah, that was fine. Lansrud,
Okay.
yeah.
Lance, yeah, that's where I went off the skis a bit, but very excited to have you here and very excited to have because I know that I think folks are very interested. We might have some folks here in attendance who know a lot about art therapy as a structured practice, maybe folks who don't know very much. And so really excited for you to sort of tell us a little bit about that world from a real experienced perspective. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.
You bet. Happy to be here.
And yeah, we'll just sort of start with you, and then we'll sort of introduce our folks from Centinela Traditional Arts. And so, if you wouldn't mind just sort of telling us a little bit about your background and maybe how you got into art therapy and sort of maybe where to start for folks who are just sort of like, what is that? Where do I start? I'm an artist, but how do what is the idea of art therapy, you know?
Sure. My background is I have a master's degree in forensic science, but I moved back. I'm from Santa Fe, grew up here, went to George Washington University for my master's degree in forensic science, worked for a while in that field, had a family emergency call me back to move back to Santa Fe. And in my transition for occupation, I found myself working part-time and then full-time at the Santa Fe Rape Crisis Center, which is now called Solace Treatment Center. And during my time there, I discovered that art therapy was a thing. Had never heard of it before, didn't know anything about it, but I had always done my own art making for health and wellness. It was just how I made sense of my experiences. When I learned it was a thing, luckily, there was an art therapy counseling school in Santa Fe that I went to for my second degree. That's Southwestern College, which is the only art therapy program in New Mexico at this time, although there used to be one at UNM. And when I enrolled, I still didn't know quite as much about it, but it fit like a glove, I would say. It was the exact perfect combination of what I wanted to do in community with my own inclinations towards helping people, but also using art and expressive modalities as an avenue. And one of the things that I learned in my educational program, and also since then, is that art therapy is not just one thing. It can be used by different people with different theoretical orientations in different settings, from inpatient to outpatient to home-based and community. There's also an array, a spectrum from open art studio type of therapy, so it'd be art as therapy, to very structured art psychotherapy, which is using art specifically for assessment and treatment planning, and then everything in between. So it's very diverse, and it's also not material limited. It can be digital, it can be stop motion, it could be video, it could be with any traditional visual art materials, as well as sculptural materials. It can even just be making pictures in the ground on a hike with natural found items. So art therapy is anything basically using materials, media, and creativity, above all creativity, in order to support health and wellness on the across the lifespan. Kids, grown-ups, our elders, families, couples. Yeah. Unmute yourself, hun.
Yeah. Thank you. That's actually the first time I've done that all day. So yeah, that's a great overview, a great introduction. And yeah, and I think it's we're also very honored and excited to be joined by some folks who have been doing exactly what you're talking about, Laura, in incorporating this notion of different kinds of therapeutic practices, or art making as a therapeutic practice, I should say. We have the powerhouse dynasty of Irv, Lisa, and Emily Trujillo from Centinela Traditional Arts. And if folks don't know about Centinela Traditional Arts and Chimayo Weavers, I encourage you to check them out. Just really wonderful artists and very innovative and creative folks. And just, yeah, they've been doing some really interesting stuff. So I'm very excited to have them here tonight to talk about that. And then we'll sort of launch it into a larger conversation about, yeah, like how these sort of go together as opportunities for individual artists and creatives to find a way to make a living at their art through this kind of practice. So who wants to go first and sort of introduce yourself? We've got Irv and Lisa and Emily. So I allow you to choose amongst yourselves.
Okay, I'm gonna go first. My name
Okay.
is Trujillo, and I'm from, actually I was born in Los Alamos, but I live in Chimayo now. We started a shop together with my father in 1982, and we've been here since then. The I guess the I I used to be an engineer, and I used to get a lot of anxiety, and so I decided to come back home where my parents lived in Chimayo and uh, weave, because I had grown up weaving as a kid, and I knew it was something I liked. And anyway, in weaving with my father, who was a sixth generation weaver, I was told about his history, and my father was an artist that was, I guess, commissioned during the WPA project, Works Progress Administration, in the 1930s, early 30s, mid 30s, I guess. And he he was commissioned to go to university in New Mexico at first, and then teach teachers who would then go into the communities and teach weaving. Eventually, he went to work for a retail vocational school and he did that in 1934. Anyway, so one of the stories that my dad told me about this was that during the war, during World War II in 1943, he was commissioned from being a gunner on a Navy ship to running a real rehabilitation center at Treasure Island in San Francisco. And he was basically taking the men or women out of the hospital and teaching them the craft of weaving so that they could divert their minds to something that was focused. And that's about all I wanted to say. Maybe I'll join in later on, but I think that's what I was here to say.
Yeah.
More about my father. So go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Irv. I didn't know that story. I know that in doing this work, I was traveling all around New Mexico and meeting lots of folks to do this research, and met up with the Trujillos in Chimayo and had a great conversation. But I didn't know that about how you sort of got into it and how it was sort of like a way to move through that anxiety. And that's really interesting. It's really cool to hear about. Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing that story with us. And yeah, who would like to go next? All right, go for it, Lisa. Yeah.
Okay, so to move on a little bit more in time, uh, my mom was an occupational therapist. So in that very first generation of them, she taught weaving among other things. Now, I knew when I was a kid, she was working as an occupational therapist. She was doing in a psych program, and she ran this program, and I knew very well that she really hated weaving. That was really all I knew about it. But she was teaching them to do all kinds of stuff. And I remember her bringing me in to work with her patients, teaching them origami. Just, it was fun. So clearly in those early years, OT was very much a crafts focused thing. And so I learned crafts, all kinds of different things from my mom. And I loved doing it. And I met Irvin. We decided we were going to do this business. And in part, it was because it was 1982 and like real jobs didn't really exist for somebody who was graduating, you know, at 20 years old with a business degree. I wasn't very, and no experience. So I decided I was going to be a professional weaver. We started this business. One of the things that became very clear was that it was great for Irvin to be weaving, but that most of the weavers who came to us to do it professionally had it was clear that it was helping them keep together. That they were people with behavioral health issues, and I will speak a little bit more about that. But and that there was a difference between the kinds of people who came to weaving as opposed to the people that we worked with who came to sew. And I can't tell you exactly what the difference is, but there's a difference. There's a personality difference there. So but weaving is very, very focused, and it requires that it's a great way to generate that catchword flow. And you just focus in, and time passes and beautiful things happen in front of your face. So it's a great process. And I think Emily probably has more to say about that. But the other thing that I wanted to add is that I have been a member of the Behavioral Health Planning Council, the New Mexico Behavioral Health Planning Council, for since 2007, which is not really forever, but it's been a long time. And I get to watch the Behavioral Health Collaborative, which I watched an earlier, or listened to an earlier panel about government stuff. And it does seem to me that intergovernmental cooperation is something that the state does have some experience with. And I have often gone there with this idea of, gee, we could be helping people if we could be teaching people in recovery from whatever. I would love for us to be able to do that. I've always wanted to be able to do that. I spoke not too long ago with somebody from DVR, the Division of Vocational Rehab, which is part of PED, public education. So, and she was interested. It would have to be strictly a local thing. But anyhow, I'm a big believer in intergovernmental cooperation, because that collaboration does make things happen. So, so I just wanted to speak to both of those things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'll
Well
let
said.
Emily. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is also like it's interesting you brought up that idea of like this flow state, and like and we were at the journalism panel talking about just competing for attention and the role of the artist or creative to sort of reset our attention spans, and the role of creative practice, and thinking about, yeah, how that kind of support is a support of community health, and that ties back into all of these things. And I know that our last speaker here today has some thoughts about community health as well through some work that she's done. So very excited to introduce Emily Trujillo as well.
Hi, my name is Emily Trujillo, and for a little context of my background is I have a double major bachelor's in psychology and ethnology, and I have been a teacher for about 4 or 5 years, and on top of that, so we're talking about kind of art therapy and things like that. So for clarification, this comes from my experience. I have diagnosed ADHD, bipolar disorder, PTSD, PMDD, among others. And so this is from my experience as someone who chose this profession because I have those mental disabilities, those issues, which I just wanted to talk about. It kind of, my mother got into talking about therapy or weaving as a therapy technique. And I can tell you as a teacher that this is something that I have observed is many of my students are neurodivergent, as we've discussed it. I'm very open with my students about these things. And what I've witnessed and what I've experienced is the people who take my classes, often they'll have low self-esteem or something like that, or other things, but it's incredibly meditative is something that I hear a lot and personally experience. It's very meditative. There's a lot of, in this style of weaving, it is very slow. So it's very mindful. You have to really focus on what you're doing so you don't make mistakes, but mistakes are inevitable in it. Like I make mistakes constantly, but it is a series of learning how to forgive yourself and move on from that, which I've witnessed a lot of my perfectionist students just be okay with letting mistakes go, which is really beautiful to see. And I wrote it down here. So yeah, and then you can kind of learn to trust yourself because it's kind of confusing. I won't get into the mechanics of weaving too much, but it's essentially one half of your weaving is always ahead of the other half. So I always tell my students to trust the process. So it is a matter of kind of letting go of what you know and what you think you have control over, because it confuses your brain, and you really just have to trust yourself and trust you know what you're doing. And also as a teacher, they allow me to help them and things like that. And it also is a great way to express yourself in terms of color and things along those lines. There's a lot of improv, so you can just improvise what color you're doing and things along those lines. And yeah, these are just something that I personally, so Centinela Traditional Arts recently opened up a school. So we have a classroom in the back of our center now. And what our goal is, we offer classes right now to people from all over the world. But what we would like to do is run all sorts of programs, like work with the DVR to give people jobs, because Centinela hires people who want to show their work. Or, I run an apprenticeship program that teaches people to have jobs weaving. That's what it's set up for. It is a paid apprenticeship that teaches people to have jobs weaving. And there is a demand for it, but people just don't know how to do it. So it basically, we would like to give back to the community in terms of this. And as I said, I only have a bachelor's in psychology, so I'm not technically qualified to do things like that. But I think that potentially having things like that run out of Centinela would be great. And the other thing we'd kind of discussed is how creative endeavors, essentially artists moving forward and things like that, I have found it necessary for me to be a professional artist to expand my horizons into things like teaching and being creative into how I apply myself and my skills in order to actually make a living. Because while I could make a living full time, it really helps me and expands my career and is extremely beneficial for me to explore these other opportunities and things like that. So I think that's one thing we were supposed to talk about, was kind of how making a living is going, and also the art therapy. So yeah, all is connected.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. All is connected. And yeah. Yeah, and I also want to give a shout out. Cris Velarde couldn't join us after all today, but Cris Velarde is speaking of it all being connected, Cris Velarde is the cultural arts specialist for the Poe Cultural Center, where he teaches and oversees the teaching, I believe, of many sort of traditional art practices. And so I encourage folks to check that out, as well as both, just as a program, but also sort of as a model of programs. And I think that would be sort of a good place to sort of continue the discussion. Is, I'm happy that you brought up teaching, Emily, and those were sort of the two examples because of who the folks here happen to be and what y'all have happened to have done, right? And those teaching and therapy are two examples of moving beyond the product. And I want to sort of zoom out a little bit and just talk and ask abstractly, because I imagine we've got a lot of artists and creatives listening, watching, who think of themselves as, well, I produce art, I make a song, I make painting, I make pottery, and I try to get people to buy that product. And that's my relationship with making a living off of my art. But maybe I have a sense that there's more out there. And I know that that's oversimplifying. But just starting from that premise, what do the folks on the panel think is the best place to start, even to identify where to go sort of beyond just this product transaction, if you want to make more of a living off of the creative practice that you're passionate about? Like, how do you know even where to go beyond the product? Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, that's one of the most important questions, I think. When I started, I had an early encounter with weaving when I was 10 years old. So from 1965, that's when I started weaving. But I went through all the other things that I like drawing, and my father basically taught us the business. So I knew, well, Lisa made the business plan for our business in school. So she was going to business school, and she actually asked my dad to help her come up with a business plan for weaving. And we knew we needed so much money to start the business. And fortunately, I had been an engineer for several years, so I had saved up some money. It helps to know a business end of things as opposed, in addition to the artist side of things, you know.
I would like to add to that. So yeah, I came into this feeling reasonably competent that I could say, keep records and all of that. The business that we run, we've had to learn, or I personally have had to learn a whole lot of different things. Obviously, the age of computers or personal computers has happened, sort of flowered in our time. So I've had to learn a lot of whole new things about marketing. Okay, well, I need to be able to cope with graphic design. I designed a book or a couple of books actually. And books are a really nice way to sell your product and your creativity. There's just a lot of different things. So, I have to know how to do everything in Office and half of the Adobe programs, I feel like. So, I have to know how to edit video and do everything in Photoshop and Lightroom and then keep track of all these images of all these weavings that we've taken pictures of all these pieces to build the website and all of that stuff. I don't want to think that this is obligatory for any artist or any creative artist. We did also try to sell music because Irvin is also a drummer, and so we've got CDs that we can help promote, but we haven't done that very well. We've got a weaving website. So, but all of these different things, there's just a lot in our modern economy or whatever in this that come to bear. We've also tried to make use of, because we're visual artists, we've tried doing some print on demand products that have done okay, mugs and mouse pads with our weavings on them and beautiful prints. We've worked with a guy who just does an excellent job of that. But I would say that to make a living from this thing that we love to do, we've had to be creative. And in this case, we were able to do it because we live here in Chimayo, which is where people come to get weavings. We have been able to sell other people's weavings. So because we're essentially a little marketing business, we have been able to take that responsibility out of the hands of other incredible artists. So the gallery model is, awkward and uncomfortable, and so, but we are both artists and running a gallery, I guess, and it's a difficult thing to straddle, but it's something that we do. And that means that these other folks don't have to be as invested. They don't have to invest a whole lot of money in their yarns and in selling, because who wants to get out there and talk to customers every single day like we do?
Right. Well, that really gets at the heart of something, certainly, as artists and creatives, like there's just this constant sort of like, like this, you're torn between having to sell yourself and having, this thing that you really care about. And it strikes me that it's also interesting that your journey of entrepreneurship has been so, so you can't just put it in one box, right? It's like it doesn't just fit into one like NAICS code, right? Like NAICS code for the economy wonks out there. And I think that it speaks to the fact that any kind of entrepreneurship efforts that support artists and creatives have to reflect the reality of that, really being any kind of entrepreneurs is sort of being all over the place and being able to be flexible, but especially being sort of an artist entrepreneur, right? And speaking of flexibility, and maybe things that are difficult for artists to in our flexible brains or whatever to get around. I wanted to ask Laura about. I know that and this is something that I talked to Dr. Good about as well, like the 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 field of occupational therapy specifically, and all kinds of therapy, are for very good reasons like well regulated, and there's a lot of licenses and standards and all that. And if you are an artist wanting to get into that and feeling sort of overwhelmed, where's the best place to start if you are very serious about it and want to go down that road? Does that question make sense?
It does, yes. So to become an art therapist, you're still an artist. Most of the students that I've taught, and I've taught at Southwestern College since 2010, and I taught at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., where I still teach online. But most of my students are artists. Many of them have come from a combination of some sort of an art degree and psychology is kind of their background. They're curious, they're interested in working with people, but they love art, they make art, it's a passion of theirs. And some of my students have left have stopped trying to sell their own art because for whatever reason, it's uncomfortable, that it wasn't quite their gig, they're not entrepreneurial in spirit. And so talk about an income stream, therapy is an income stream. And so that's where a lot of students in my own anecdotal experience have come from. And it is licensed. It's a master's degree level license. It's title protected in all states that have that license type, New Mexico being the very first in 1994, thanks to Dr. Good. And it is regulated. It's regulated by the state board and by statute. And it's heavily regulated. It's title protected, meaning just because you like art doesn't mean what you're doing is art therapy. Just because it has a therapeutic impact doesn't mean it's art therapy. And that's to protect the public, because there are certain contraindications around material usage, around directives, around setting, around readiness, and really to be able to understand the use of art in a therapeutic manner does take advanced education. But once graduated, once getting your license, and once becoming paneled with insurance companies, Medicaid, Medicare, and many commercial insurance companies reimburse for art therapy, which is fairly new. Our New Mexico legislature passed legislation to allow that for Medicaid and Medicare or Medicaid in 2022, I believe. And again, Dr. Good spearheaded a lot of that initiative with a whole bunch of support, including mine and many of our colleagues. So there is money. There's money to be made. It's a regular time, and I will speak from my own experience. I'm in private practice part-time, and I work part-time as a clinical supervisor for a behavioral health agency in Santa Fe that serves children and families. We have a lack. We have a great, great need for more therapists, especially art therapists, and especially from New Mexico. People will move here and come to school, and many of them stay, but we really are trying to, I mean, the state needs people from our rural areas in New Mexico to go back to their communities and do the service.
And folks from rural who is hiring in the rural communities for those kinds of jobs?
There's behavioral health agencies scattered throughout New Mexico. And for those of us who are old enough to remember 2013, when the governor shut down the behavioral health network, just basically eradicated almost, I would say, 8, 9, 10 agencies that were serving in a cohesive fashion many parts of New Mexico. Right now, there's just a need of agencies as well. Many of us are coming back. Team Builders is where I work. They returned 5 years ago, but nowhere near the size. We had 26 offices across New Mexico, especially areas that people didn't want to relocate to, by getting people who are already living there, helping train them, and then overseeing their work through supervision. Tucumcari and Clovis and Roswell and up north. So like Raton. So we're in need of growth, expansion, and that's one area where the state really can help, is to, support agencies, community mental health agencies, the work that is needed, which is comprehensive community support services, CCSS. It's an advanced, I'll just use the term advanced case management type of model that allows people to see clients in their community, at their home, and in the office in an integrated fashion to support transition of skills that are learned in the office or through clinical services into their natural lives. It really works really well with kids and adolescents, teens, teenagers on probation. We have a lot of referrals for that as well. So people in rural areas need to come get their master's degree in art therapy or even counseling, because there is a way to ethically provide creative methods, including art making, in counseling. Just can't call yourself an art therapist.
And are any of those programs like online? I mean, this is maybe a stupid question, but
no, it's not stupid at all. Yes, because I hate to say thanks to COVID, but it did help break down some of those butt-in-seat type of educational modalities. So now there's more online, there's more hybrid, there's educational possibilities outside of New Mexico online, and even within New Mexico online or locally, or a combination.
Yeah, that's really cool, because I mean that is helpful for folks in rural areas, and who to stay in their communities and get that education, and then stay working in their communities. And then we got some questions going on in the Q&A. Shawnee Harvey from the EDD wants to make sure, and it is true, that it was not the current governor that shut those down.
Susana Martinez.
Who knows the names of people.
I think Lisa wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was the chair of the Behavioral Health Planning Council when that happened, and it was the most difficult thing that I might have ever done in my life, because people thought that the Planning Council could do something about it. And it was a matter of being completely, we had no power and no say in what happened, and we just observed the destruction and horrific.
Yeah, and it sounds like things are, like you mentioned with Laura, with the moves by legislators to have insurance pay for some of these therapy, licensed therapy, like that seems like a good trend. And we've also got some folks in the chat interested in the history. And I looked up a little bit. It is like a cool history. New Mexico is, in fact, a leader in this, really. And so I encourage folks to go research that history. But you also mentioned, Laura, educational modalities, and I think that gives us a nice little pivot to ask Emily some questions about getting into teaching. And growing up, family of artists, right? And you've done a lot of work, like you said, as a teacher, and sort of trying to innovate different education models through the center. Can you tell us a little bit about just sort of your journey getting into teaching, like as a practice, and how you feel it complements your art practice and all those kind of classic, hard questions?
Yeah, no worries. I have found that being involved in the community is very beneficial, and just really making relationships, learning about people, really caring and improving your skills. People will give you opportunities as long as you really care, you really try, you really know what you're doing. I care a lot about how I teach, and I get a lot of positive feedback because of my teaching skills, which come from truly observing my students and connecting with them. So I have found that that's really important. Sorry, I'm like have anxiety, so I'm a bit panicked. But Yeah, I've been making opportunities for myself most of the time. At this point in my career is I'm making a lot of opportunities for myself, and I can't like talk about some of what I'm doing right now because well, it's for future stuff.
Right.
But
It's in flux. Yeah.
yeah, but that's kind of what I'm doing right now is, my parents and we made this school in the back of our shop, which happened because I worked so hard at gaining these skills and building a community and getting people interested, which I didn't do all on my own. I don't want everyone to think like, wow, it's all hard work. No, absolutely. Like my parents' work before me helped out a lot. And then, the relationships that they had made and things like that. So it wasn't like I wasn't lucky, right? I was given these gifts. And unfortunately, I feel like that's something that makes things a lot easier. But yeah. What else? What do you want to know specifically about it?
Well, what would you say like pathways, and maybe folks in the chat can sort of jump in with specific questions because I feel like we've introduced, and you guys have done a great job introducing like 3 pretty clear pathways, right? Like both, Lisa, you were talking about just the hustle, right? Entrepreneurship, and business planning and figuring out a way to have those skills complement. And then Laura, you're talking about this process that's pretty has a pretty clear path, right? And then Emily, I think you're speaking really eloquently to sort of establish like what it means. Like anybody like can go become a teacher, right? Like get a teaching degree, maybe not anybody, but you know what I mean. But like to establish yourself in your community as someone the community trusts, and that is really the key to serving this role, right? And so yeah, these sort of 3 paths, I think folks have really identified them. And um yeah, I wonder on teaching specifically, how would you do it if, you were just sort of found yourself starting from scratch or found yourself maybe like in the middle of something else, some other kind of career and wanting to get into it, realizing you had this passion, but you didn't know where to start?
Well, I didn't start as a teacher for the record. Like I'm very bad at I have ADHD, so I'm constantly going around, so I'm really sorry. But so I didn't start teaching. I started by weaving and I chose weaving because I had such bad anxiety. I kind of stumbled into it by accident of basically people knew I existed and the previous teacher couldn't make it. It was actually my mom couldn't make it to teach this class. And so they asked me instead. And at that point, I didn't have any experience, but I had been established in the community and I had established my art skills at that point. So I was technically qualified for this. And from then on, it was just, it was building, offering myself, like making it clear that I had these skills and making it clear that I was what I was capable of doing. And also I had to be really brave and put myself out of my comfort zone. And I've been very creative about how I've approached I've designed programs myself, right? So it's like, that's kind of what I would say is like really be creative and observe what the community is looking for and what the community needs and really take that to heart and yeah, be innovative. I really have I teach a lot of programs at this point and I'm very creative about how I approach it and making sure that I'm asserting myself and my own original ideas into it and things along those lines. But yeah, I've really put myself out of my comfort zone in many, many ways. But it was successful. It's been a successful endeavor. And, I've studied so much. Like I also know a lot about the history because I've studied. So I made my own path in many ways. So
Yeah.
the
I think
teaching.
that's Yeah, I think that's such a great point to study what the community wants and needs, and to just to fulfill that need to have that sort of service-oriented mindset, right? And it's in some ways it's interesting because it can be sort of counter to the artist mindset, right? And we make art for ourselves and we make, it's interesting and I think it seems basic on some level, but it's really important, right? And I'm really happy that you identified that. Let's see. We have about 10 minutes left, and I imagine that folks might have some questions. So I want to make sure that if you do have questions, we have this Q&A little section here, and we've got some folks who've been sharing some experiences and asking some questions, but I do want to make sure that folks know about the Q&A. And
May I add
as,
something about education too?
oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Emily, it just sparked my my thought about something that I wanted to add. Thank you, Emily. Is that there is, I've been teaching a long time and my dissertation was actually on counseling education and the use of creative modalities within that. But there is a trend in my research that I found of integrating not just creativity and the arts into curriculum across, K through 12 and and postgraduate and baccalaureate, on and on. It is addressing a need of our new generations, our younger generations, for not traditional, again, button seat, staring at a blackboard or a screen type of education. And there are a lot of trends right now that I'm super excited about where the question is, how do we engage students at the level that they need, which is something Emily said about communities. How do I teach to what the need is in the community? And that does often involve creativity of a variety of sets. Even with ChatGPT, there's a lot of new creative ways to, like, okay, if you're going to go look it up the answer, here's a dictionary, here's a calculator, we've gotten used to how to find information. So then how do we bring creative, innovative thought to complex problems is the next challenge.
Yeah, I'm interested. Also, the mention of ChatGPT sparks something, just again, maybe sort of an obvious thing that I feel like I have to say as with like economic development hat on, is that all of these things that you're talking about, this creativity and innovation in educational practice, teaching practices, even therapeutic practices, is also your intellectual property, right? And that is itself an income stream and like a potential source of developing your creativity and developing sort of value out of your creativity. And that being said, and a very important point, right? And what are some of those trends? Like, what's really exciting? Because you mentioned, Laura, like that there are some trends that are really exciting to you. Can you give us an example?
Yeah, well, for me, my heart flutters with transformative learning models, and there are more than one, and they tend to, it's evolved, kind of like CBT has evolved from the more strict rigid into way more mindfulness based and more here now sensory oriented somatic. And the same with transformative learning theory. It's evolved from what it used to be in the 70s into something that is highly diverse. It is culturally responsive, and it is interpersonal, very interpersonal. And the learning environment is a priority, not just the content of information being conveyed, but how groups of people come together, how they learn together, and how they teach one another new ways of answering complex problems. And art and creativity are embedded almost innately embedded in those conversations, in the experientials, and in the research.
Can you give us a place? Maybe you could put it in the chat if you want. I'll make you, if I make you a co-host, you can send your chat out to everyone. Like, where would a person who wants to learn more about transformative learning theory and the contemporary version, where might they go first? You can think about that question, or if you have an answer immediately, you can type it or whatever, but just to sort of send folks who want to go down that rabbit hole, because it does sound cool.
Well, there are teaching institutions for it who teach people how to teach using transformative learning models. So, because not everybody who is good at what they do can teach what they're good at. And
Right.
so teaching is a unique skill, not just being, so in my case, being an artist or a therapist, but being able to teach it is a unique skill, and learning how to teach it is where some help can come in. There's a lot of books as well around transformative. I'm trying to think if I have anything accessible. I can look at my bookshelf when I turn
Yeah.
around. I
Yeah.
don't want to leave to go like do research.
No. Let me,
But
so we only,
there's a lot of user-friendly books on what is it, how to do it in current sort of postmodern times.
got it. Yeah. Well, that sounds awesome. And yeah, I think, and you know, we are recording these, and we'll send follow-up emails. And so maybe we can put some resources in our follow-up email if folks are interested. I do want to, as we're sort of winding up here, I want to make sure to, I think that you guys have done a great job presenting lots of interesting opportunities, mindsets, pathways for artists and creatives. And I want to ask you guys, and you've brought up some examples already, like Lisa, you brought up some examples. How can the state or this new creative industries divisions, you know, specifically, better support some of these things that you've been talking about this whole hour? Like these, especially, you know, maybe around collaboration between and all that. Like, I imagine y'all might have some pretty strong ideas about that.
Well, I would love to see places like Lisa and Irv and Emily bringing interns who are studying counseling or art therapy. They can be supervised off-site. I'm a supervisor. There's many of us around, but seeing how the state can support bridging the help the community needs with people who are doing really creative things.
Cool.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, is finding a way to connect. So, you know, it's like, as I said, I'm not qualified to be an art therapist. My degree, I don't have the proper training, but I know it would be very beneficial for people, judging by what I've seen from my students. The only person that can really make this connection, like make it viable for, you know, professionals who are looking into therapy, as well as people in my position, the only way we can really connect, because as a working adult, it's very hard to do pro bono work. So, but it would be so beneficial. The government is probably our best bet at looking at connecting these two fields to benefit the community in a way that, you know, we can't do individual. I'm so sorry. My cats are like all over this. I'm so sorry.
You're
But
good.
yeah, I think the government could definitely help with a lot of these things, but and that would be a discussion that would need to be had, but absolutely they would, if they stepped in, that would be super awesome.
Yeah, I wonder if there's some kind of triangulation involving some of, yeah, like from the behavioral health side and the creative industry side, and also like the JTIP program run through the Department of Workforce Solutions, which does provide for other kinds of industries some of that material support for apprenticeships. And I wonder if there might be some ideas around triangulation there. That's just what comes to mind. And yeah, what were you going to say,
Emily
Lisa?
didn't mention that one of our teaching programs is an apprenticeship program too.
Oh no, I did.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
that's actually a grant. That's a grant funded thing. So it's basically we provide jobs to people in the area. Oh, sorry. Do you want to say it? But yeah, I did mention it. But
it's these guys. So people it's a clothing company who licensed designs from us, and they wanted to give back to the community. And I decided that our industry was dying because people did not have those skills. I wanted to add another thing that I think is important too, that teaching is, it will, in my experience, it has completely, I don't know, magnified my creativity. So I learn so much more by teaching. So things that I think I know, somebody else, I'm trying to teach somebody else this, and I can see how they understand it or don't understand it, and I have to come up with a reframing of this whole idea to get it through to this person and to make it serviceable to them, I come up with all kinds of new creative solutions myself. And so I really think that teaching is something that artists, I've always, I mean, I've known all kinds of other artists who love to teach, but I just think it's been a huge part of my own weaving growth, my growth as an artist. So I just thought I'd throw that in there. I think that's important.
Yeah, that's really beautifully said. Yeah, go ahead, Irv.
So, my experience is that there's two paths, and that's a grassroots where somebody will say, oh, you need to go, you might go over to this person because they know something, or they're sent by somebody. In other words, a counselor or somebody like that. But reaching the grassroots person is the problem. In other words, a person here that lives up the Arroyo in Chimayo might not know that there's an opportunity just up the street, or you can go learn something that would, improve your condition that you might be interested in. And how do you reach that person? I think that's one of the problems that I've seen. Most of the people that have approached our business to be able to sell to our business came out of an economic need. In other words, they didn't have a job, but they knew how to weave, and they didn't know how to get, how do you get into the industry? How do you do that? And, it's not in a book. In my experience, a lot of the things that we teach were passed down through generations, and it wasn't something that was in a book until now. But anyway,
No, I mean, I think that's really beautifully said, and I feel like that's a nice sort of spot to leave us at. Yeah, just to think about how all of the structures that support all of this work can do a good job honoring, like you're saying, Irv, the ways that these kinds of exchanges of knowledge and preservation of knowledge, and sort of the therapeutic benefits of knowledge, right? How they actually sort of travel between people, right? Like on the ground, outside of formal structures or interacting with formal structures, and to think about how can these sort of institutional efforts like respect and honor that like you were saying, or grassroots. And I think all of our folks here tonight are just, yeah, really wonderful, experienced practitioners, and it's been so cool to hear your stories, and it's striking to me how all of these stories have this component of I'm doing something I didn't think I was going to be doing, right? Like I started here and now I'm here. And I think that that's like a really, really beautiful thing. And I wonder how can we honor that, and how can we sort of support that kind of path making, right? Like for artists and creatives moving through their lives. So yeah, thank you all so much. Thanks to Laura, to Irv, to Lisa, to Emily. And we'll be sending out a recording. We'll follow up with thanks everybody for attending. This has been really beautiful, really cool conversation. And I really, really appreciate everybody taking the time. And yeah, we'll just sort of keep thinking about these things. And I encourage folks to reach out to everybody here, to Laura and Emily and Irv, and Lisa, and to other people in your community, and to keep sort of building these communities amongst each other, because that's how it gets done for sure. So thank you all so much, and we'll see everybody tomorrow, hopefully, maybe. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for being here. Really,
Bye.
yeah, it was awesome. It was great.